How's it going? It is great to be back with you all a little bit face-to-face this way, and I hope you are doing well and you survived the holidays and that extreme cold weather that you've been having over there. We've had the opposite here on the West Coast, and it's been sunny and balmy, although tonight we have one of our very first snowstorms that's about to hit. So anyway, I hope everyone can make it. Please jump on the chat if I'm going too quickly. I know last time we had a couple of connection issues, so if for whatever reason you don't hear me or I shut out, please jump on that chat and let me know. And then, as always, any questions that arise, any thoughts, ahas, it's really nice to interact with you on the other side of the screen. I cannot see your faces, nor can I hear you. So as a presenter, it's nice when you have an aha, jump on that chat line today and just say, hey, here's what I've been learning, here's where I am, because I really want to make sure this webinar isn't just me speaking here for 90 minutes. What I'd like to do is make it as interactive as possible, and that means I'd love to have you interacting and hearing from one another through the chat feature. So if you would, let's practice this, kind of get it going so I can see that it's going to work. Jump on your chat feature right now and type in your greatest aha that you have had, or one aha that you have had since I was last there. It's been a while. It's been about half a year since I was there last, almost. And I would love to hear, as you've been engaging in this work around observation and feedback, what would you point out as being one aha that you have had in the last several months? Go ahead and pop it up on your chat feature, and I'm pulling mine up as well. And let's see if we can't get this going here. I'd love to hear from some of you. Stacy, all right. It's not a bad thing if teachers resign as a result of observations. Absolutely true, Stacy. That is right. Oh, that's great. Great aha, yes. You know, sometimes our questioning may probe folks to think a little differently about what they're doing, if they're on the right seat of the bus or not. And yes, it may lead them to make different life decisions. So yes. All right. Very stressful, but worth it. Absolutely, Stacy. I have been there. I've been in your shoes where I've had some frank conversations with folks just about, are they on the right seat of the bus, and are they working out of their strengths and their capacity? Okay, let's continue reading here. Gina, using the question, what is your purpose for blank, is a helpful way to frame feedback and bring teachers deeper into their practice. Absolutely. And you know, Gina, we're going to even talk a little bit further about that today. I didn't see Joyce. Joyce, are you out there? Joyce sent in early a scenario that we're going to unpack today, and we'll connect it right back to that question, you know, what is your purpose for the lesson today? Okay, let's see who else, and keep them coming, please. For those of you that have just come aboard, I'm asking you to jump on your chat feature before we get started today and type in what's been an aha, just one aha that you've had in this school year around observation and feedback as you've engaged in that practice. Okay, Suzanne, I found that even though you can give 57 positive examples of good feedback and one criticism, the teacher focuses just on that one thing. That is right, Suzanne. Absolutely. And isn't that the nature of education? It's part of this dynamic and culture that's been around for a very long time. We're either in the good category or the bad category. And that's a cultural element that we, in this work, through observation and feedback, are seeking to break. Absolutely. Beth, videotaping. Yes, it is a hard sell. Absolutely. And you know, we've mentioned this before, we've touched on it briefly, but strategies such as videotaping, asking folks to get into each other's classrooms and observe, they're not a one-size-fits-all strategy. And there's a time and a place to implement those strategies, but it takes a lot of build-up. And, you know, videotaping, not unlike us coming into their rooms and leaving observation and feedback, can be a very stressful thing for teachers, and it has to be framed in the right way for it to be taken in a positive light. Debbie, same as Suzanne. Yes, isn't it interesting? I remember that being in the classroom myself. My administrator would walk through, leave feedback on the desk, and leave the room. And of course, I was instantly over there picking up my feedback, reading, and what did I do? I skimmed for what the negative was. So I'm going to leave you right now. I'm going to plant this little seed, a question to you that I'd like you to stick in the back of your minds. And I'd like you to roll over and over and over again as we engage in our work over the next 90 minutes. And I'm going to come back to it at the end of today. So my point is this, stick this in the back of your minds. Think about this, what we see to be happening all the time, where teachers tend to glom on to our constructive feedback over just the glowing positives that we leave. Why is that? And then what might we do in terms of our feedback? How might we frame feedback so that that doesn't happen? Knowing that that is commonplace when it comes to observation and feedback. How might we then frame our feedback in a different light? Because here's what I'll say to this. When you notice a teacher that takes the observation and or the feedback that you provide, and all they do is look at the one constructive piece that maybe you put in there about doing something differently next time, what does that tell you about their thinking? Think about that for a minute. The way teachers act, the things they do, is a window into their minds. So when they do that, what does that tell us about their thinking, number one? And then how might we learn from that moment, adjust our actions, and try it in a different way? We'll get to that today. Okay, let's move on and get going. Here we go. I wanted to start today, and there we go. It's coming. Took me a minute. I wanted to start today, as I always do, with a short review from the last time we were all together, just to frame our mindset and to get us thinking about observation and feedback from a different perspective. So I start with my why. We showed the why video the last time I was there. I have a why that I work from each and every day. This drives what I do. And that why is this quote here. I'm all about creating environments where teachers, all adults really, are empowered to take charge of their own professional growth. And they see learning as the end, not perfection. I was in Iowa last week. Yes, it was very cold, below zero. And I was in Iowa last week working with a group of administrators in a small school district in the center of Iowa. And as we were engaging in this work, I had a principal raise his hand. And he said, I struggle because as I'm leaving feedback for my teachers, everything is about perfection. Teachers are all about perfection. He goes, I get into a classroom and I can tell they're putting on a show for me. And he said, and when I leave, I know that show changes. And that's my greatest struggle as I engage in observation and feedback. And he said, what can I do to stop the show from happening? In a classroom, if a teacher has an absolutely perfect lesson, I don't care. My question is, what did you learn after you had that perfect lesson? What did you learn as you were engaging in that work? What did you learn from your students? And what did you learn as a professional as a result of that perfect lesson? And my emphasis as an administrator is going to be around what did you learn from that experience? Because learning is the end. Now, you might be thinking, okay, yes, you're right, but there is something to be said about perfection in a lesson because that leads to student learning. And you're right. But here's the difference. Find me a teacher who's engaged in learning from his and her students. You'll find students who are learning from the teacher. The two go hand in hand. If I have a teacher that's bringing about perfect lessons all the time, but not really learning from them, I will have apathetic and mediocrity in terms of student learning. The two go hand in hand, and that's what this all comes back to. We want to create environments where teachers are part of learning, and that's what they see. So when we come back to the ideal outcomes of our observation and feedback, I threw this up the last time I was there. What's our purpose? What's our goal? Is it about perfection in the classroom? Is it about making sure that teachers have perfect lessons? What is your goal in your mind as you engage in observation and feedback? Go ahead and jot on the chat line for me. Talk to me a little bit about this. What is your purpose for engaging in observation and feedback in your building? Is it a checklist item? What would you say is your purpose? It's okay to take a moment and think about this. This is a question I ask administrators when I work with them. And I'll tell you, most folks sit and look and go, I don't really know. I mean, I know it's to better education. But at the end of the day, what really is our greater, larger purpose and vision for this work that we engage in? Helping teachers grow, absolutely, and develop, giving students the best instruction possible. That's right, Stacy, yes. Karen, thank you. Very good, Gina, yes. Fix my hair. Every adult learner deserves high-quality learning experience. Yes, they do. Everyone deserves that. That's right. So with that in mind, when we know that we're going in and we're engaging in our observation and feedback practices, how do we know that we're working toward these aims that you just shared on that chat? How do we know? Thank you, Christine. Yes. Keeping them from becoming stagnant. Yes. So how do we know when our work in observation and feedback goes well? When we're reaching these aims, when we are doing this? Yes. We can see, not just see. Yes, you're right, Christine and Stacy. We actually see the shifts in thinking and shifts in their actions. You guys are nailing it. I love it. Yes. Right? And there's two shifts that happen, and you've all touched on it. It's a shift in thinking that leads to a shift in action. That's right. And ultimately, then when you see the shifts in the teacher, boom, you see the students making those shifts. Yes, excellent. Our teachers are different, and ultimately our students are different. That's right. I want you to consider something. Is it possible to engage in reflective practice and it be ineffective? Resounding yeses. I'm hearing this blip on my screen every time everyone's coming through. Yes, 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 absolutely. We have to think about that and consider it, because reflection in and of itself can become an act of compliance. Reflection that's truly effective is something that shifts what we do, right? And Bernice, you're nailing it. Yes, the reflection has to hit to a deeper level. Now, the last time I was there, we talked about reflection isn't like a light switch. It's not something that we turn on and off. Reflection is something, it's a skill that must be developed for it to actually have fruit that comes out in the actions, fruit that comes out in student learning, creating the environments in the classrooms that we want to create. And it all starts with building the right habits and thinking around what we do. Okay, so I'm building here because we're going to get to an actual scenario and connect all of this. I showed this slide the last time we talked. That feedback piece is crucial, absolutely crucial when it comes to our observations. And we know that. You've all touched on it already today, right? We give feedback, but how do we make that feedback effective enough that it shifts thinking, that it shifts and leads teachers to reflect in a deeper, different way? You and I both know we can leave feedback and folks just can take it in the wrong way. It leads to different experiences that aren't exactly positive. So let's build just a little bit more the frame around feedback. We know, according to Hattie, but it isn't just according to Hattie, it's according to so many other researchers. Dylan Willems is one of my favorite authors, researchers, educators that is like a mentor to me, and very influential in my work. And he even has this to say about feedback. He talks that feedback has such a high factor when it comes to observation. If we don't leave that feedback, then learning won't take place on the other end. And our feedback, though, has to be very careful. It is one of those things that has to actually shift thinking, lead to learning. Otherwise, the feedback is not effective. So in other words, we can walk in a classroom and leave feedback around, hey, great job, really liked when you did this. But does that shift someone's thinking? Does that lead them to see something that they didn't see before? Does that lead to learning? No. The feedback that you see here, that directly connects to teacher learning and development must be more specific than that. It must be framed in different ways. And when you try to frame feedback in a different way, which we'll get to in a minute, and you leave that feedback, you instantly see learning instead of more of that emotional reaction. Now, I will tell you this before we get any further. If you have a culture, which we all are working in, cultures where they are so used to feedback being very positive or very bland in general in terms of, great job, loved this, looks like you're having a lot of fun in here today. When our teachers are used to receiving that feedback, and all of a sudden that feedback shifts, you begin to make the shift in your feedback. Instantly, you will have panic. There will be teachers that panic, that freeze, that aren't sure about all of this. But if you remember back in August when I was there for your face-to-face, we talked about the importance of setting up those expectations. We talked about the importance of telling teachers, I'm shifting the way that I'm providing feedback now. Here's what you can expect. Here's some examples of what my feedback will look like and sound like. And catch this, here's the why. Here's why I'm now shifting the way that I provide feedback. It probably is going to be different than any feedback you've ever received because I'm connecting it to my why. And my why is that you take ownership of your own professional growth. See how we connect all those pieces? Those expectations must be shared explicitly. Has to happen. And it isn't something that just happens at the beginning of the year in August. It's something that needs to be revisited on a regular basis. So my encouragement to you is this. As you start your second semester here, revisit those expectations. Bring everything back to your why you engage in observation and feedback, your purpose, and what teachers can expect from you. Give them some examples so that when they receive some feedback, such as, talk to me about the objective in your lesson today, they're not hearing it as, oh, I'm doing everything wrong. If we jump and switch up on teachers in terms of our feedback, they will immediately take it as something has shifted and they're seeing me in a different light. And we know, because we're creatures of habit, we typically fall right into, they don't like me, I'm doing something wrong. So it's important that we share that with our teachers, right? Okay, I'm going to pause for just a minute. I want you to think of an aha, something I'm saying right now that's deeply resonating with you, that's connecting to maybe where you are right now in this whole process. Or if I'm surfacing some questions or this, what you have next, I'd like you to post it for me. So I'd love to hear from you right now. Let's take a little pause in my talking, and I'd love to hear from you. What's at the forefront of your mind as I'm saying all of these things? What's resonating? What particular aha might you be having right now? What questions might you have that this is leading you to think about? I hear typing on the other end of the line. That's great. Hey, we'll start off with Stacy. The need to revisit my own why. Continue to share it. Yes. Get discouraged when simple things are not implemented because the teacher doesn't believe the research. Yes. It can be difficult. Absolutely. Leslie, it's the effectiveness of being so explicit. Yes. It's so easy to be in the defense when receiving feedback that I feel we need to help staff learn to expect to be supported. Exactly. Yes. Absolutely. And that connects right back to Stacy's why of the why. We have to share the why with our teachers and continually come back to it. I like hearing that to be expected. Teachers might have a negative reaction to a change. Yes, absolutely. We want to be proactive in this work. Beth, the why of a program may not be apparent. No, it is not. We assume so much. Christine, seeing the scared look when you talk about observation and feedback. Yes. Ooh, Christine, I want to come back to that in a minute. I'm going to read through everybody else's and then come back to yours. Suzanne, difficult process. It's hard to get teachers to buy into the importance. Absolutely. I'm going to come back to yours in a minute, Suzanne. Joyce. Yes. Hi, Joyce. You're here. Welcome. I'm so glad you made it. Good to see you on here.
Can you hear me Can you hear me, Alisa?
We can. Yes, I can. Hello. Welcome.
Oh, finally. Thank you.
Now, Debbie, explaining the why is critical to teachers accepting it. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm going to give you a couple of ideas. Recently in a different school in Iowa, I've been doing a lot of work in Iowa recently. I was in a different school in Iowa, and the principal shared with me that she was struggling with what Christine shared here. This idea that there's this deer in the headlights look every time observation feedback is discussed, because everything is connected back to that evaluative practice. This principal was sharing that they walked into a building where it was definitely fear-based culture around observation and feedback particularly. And so the principal was sharing how this year this has been their focus in terms of their own professional growth. And the principal, she shared, she goes, I wanted to make this my focus this year, to figure out what I could do to support teachers, and as Suzanne said, to get the buy-in in terms of importance. So what she shared was, at the beginning of the year, she shared her expectations, as we've talked about. Then every month, as she has held staff meetings, she's put some feedback stems up on the board for the entire staff to see. Not connecting it to a teacher, of course, but she's put a feedback stem up. And she said, and then from there, I asked teachers to discuss in small groups how that feedback stem can connect to their own learning in the classroom and drive their own professional development, their own professional learning. She said, it has been one of the most powerful experiences that I've had, because what's happened is I'm now taking feedback stems that they see, they hear, throwing it to them and asking them to break it apart, to unpack it, and then connect it back to their own learning. And then she said, and then I have folks share, how might that support you, careful language, how might that support you and strengthen you as a teacher, not tear you down? Stacy, yes, we're going to actually get to those here in a few minutes. I've got a ton of them. We're going to spend the second half of today talking about those stems and our tools that you have actually already in your hands. So we'll talk about those. But this principal has shared that when they've done that with their staff, it's been the most powerful, amazing experience. As you can see, it helps teachers realize and unpack, and they hear each other talking about why this particular feedback stem isn't a scary thing, and that she's basically reframing everything to that positive light of support, empower, build up. And so she's reframed it. But this principal has been very intentional in her work around observation and feedback, in helping to reconstruct what that looks like in a school where it was definitely not something that was a positive experience for teachers and brought so much fear. So that's a little tidbit, going back to some of your pieces, that you might try. Be intentional about this. Take charge of it. If there is fear, if there is pushback, instead of taking it at face value, let's look underneath it. What's the subcurrent? There's fear. How might you then address that fear? Because good leaders know their followers very well, and good leaders basically teach their followers. So you're now learning from your students, which are your teachers. You're learning from your teachers, and now it's time for them to learn from you reciprocally around observation and feedback. And it's up to us as leaders to teach, to reframe all of this work. Okay, let's keep going and let's get to those feedback stems. All right, we've seen the impact of instructional leadership, right? This is important for us to share that with our staff. Let me see why I'm clicking. Let's see, here we come. Ooh. Let me go back. I think I went too far. My apologies. Okay. Now, for some reason, my tools are not showing up on this slide. So my slide here says, how do these tools connect to this work? On this slide is supposed to be a picture of our continuum of self-reflection and our reflective cycle. So I want you to take a moment, think about those two tools, because we've worked from them every time we've worked together. We have two tools, our reflective cycle, which I'll show you an example in a minute, and then our continuum of self-reflection. Those are our two tools that guide us and support us in this work. So we're not sitting there trying to come up with what is the right feedback stem, what do I do, what type of feedback does this teacher need that's going to lead them to thinking differently and not reacting the way that they are currently reacting. So I'm going to kind of skip past this slide and let's move forward. But I do want to ask you, if you have it on hand, whatever, grab it, put it in front of you, because in a few minutes we are going to unpack a scenario here that Joyce sent in, and we're going to really now connect what I've just said to a particular scenario and a teacher, and talk about how we might be strategic in this work. So I'd like you to think right now, you know the continuum, you know the reflective cycle. Chime in again on the chat line for me here. How do you see those tools connecting this in a different way? In fact, let me change that up. How are you currently using, if you are, the reflective cycle and the continuum of self-reflection? And if you're not using it, that's okay. There's no right or wrong, good or bad here. I would just like to hear from you how you're using it. How frequently? Is it something you glance at? Is it something you're using on a daily basis? How are you connecting the continuum of self-reflection and the reflective cycle currently to your work around observation and feedback? Give you a minute. How are you currently using the continuum of self-reflection and the reflective cycle in your work? Okay, Joyce shared, using it to formulate questions during feedback. Great. Has anyone used those or connected these tools with teachers? Has anyone put these tools together with teachers? Stacy, in the new program manual, shared staff journal with reflective questions. Great. Ooh, staff journal. Great idea. Place teachers on the continuum, Christine. Have the teachers put themselves. Very nice. Oh, we've got our miracle worker behind the scenes right now, putting her magic wand up, sharing this. Great. Thank you so much. Kate, let's see. Okay, Gina, use the sentence frames word for word. Great. Beautiful. Yes. Susan, using it to help to identify where teachers are, where they need support. Leslie, being somewhat new, use it constantly. Great. I've tried identifying where teachers are. Great. Good to hear your feedback and know where you are in this process. That's fantastic. So if you take a look at your screen, we've got these tools. I'm going to give a quick refresher because I know we're all at different places in terms of our understanding with this. But what I want to do is I want to connect you with the purpose of these tools. It's to deepen our reflective understanding. It's to help teachers engage in learning in real time with their students. That's what it's all about. So that teachers are learning from their students at the same time students are learning from teachers. That's the biggest piece I want you to walk away from today. It's this synergy of learning, teachers learning from students, students learning from teacher, and back and forth. So these tools help drive teachers to think differently in allowing this to happen. So we start with our reflective cycle. That's on the top. The colors, of course, coordinate with our continuum of self-reflection. But at the end of the day, my goal for any teacher is to help develop this skill of reflection so that they are deepening their awareness about something. That then propels them and drives them to go click in their brain and go, okay, here's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now, being very deliberate and connecting the knowing, the doing. Then their brain goes click into, is this working? Is this not working? How do I know? And then the brain does the fourth click of, all right, based upon what I just learned, what happens next? Where do I go with this? And that then, of course, propels them into the awareness quadrant again, where they deepen it. Now, let me give you a little insight into this tool particularly. In our work over the past 10 years around this tool, around how reflective practitioners think, what we have found is this. Building awareness is easy, right? We can have teachers have ahas, and they can talk about that aha. Many teachers then get into that second quadrant of, okay, based upon what I know, here's what I'm doing. But most often folks are on stuck in those two right-handed quadrants. It's very difficult for them to make the turn into this predictable pattern of thinking, frequent pattern of thinking of, is this working? How do I know? Is this not working? How do I know? That's a difficult transition to make. And remember how I asked you before, can reflective practice occur without it being life-changing, without it being effective? And you said yes. Here's why. If we spend all our time on the right-hand side of this cycle, in the first two quadrants, and we never shift and move into the left-handed side, our thinking will not shift. Think about that in terms of your impact in observation and feedback. I can get into a classroom and I can point out what a teacher needs to see, and I can get a teacher to begin engaging in different work. But if we never then move into that next quadrant and begin to say, did that work? Did that not work? How do you know? Because that drives us back to student learning. And if that then doesn't propel me into going, okay, what do I need? What adjustments need to be made? Then I'm not truly allowing reflection to impact what I do in a deep way. Okay? And Debbie, you're right. Sometimes this work isn't always very obvious, nor should it be. So don't fall into that trap of thinking this needs to be something that's very explicit. This work happens oftentimes behind the scenes. So we're constantly thinking about where teachers are, and we're allowing that awareness to drive what we do because we're on this cycle ourselves. Now that connects back to our continuum of self-reflection. And that continuum of self-reflection, we know, is a tool that allows us to assess where a teacher may be. And then in order to be able to differentiate our feedback so that we can help a teacher move around that reflective cycle in a faster way. Are there any questions about these tools before we jump into our scenario? Any questions about these? Okay, I'm going to move on. I know it takes a minute for your messages to come up in my way, but we're going to go ahead and move on. Joyce sent in a scenario a couple of days ago, and it's a scenario that I would like us to unpack. Now, if you remember when I was there in August, we engaged in that consultancy protocol where we each shared a scenario, and then we began to really look at it and analyze it and break it apart, and it led us to really engaging in coaching work, but then at the same time also see things from that 30,000-foot perspective from our work. And so we're not going to follow the consultancy protocol here today in this format. It would be too difficult. But what I do want to do is I'm going to ask you to be very active and engaged as we unpack this scenario. I'm going to throw out some questions, and I want you brainstorming. So have your fingers on those keys and be ready to type, because as I throw out questions, I'd like your quick answers. Even if it's a one-word answer, I'd like you to be engaging and interacting, and let's get this going at the same time, the chat line going as we begin to talk. So here's the scenario, and Joyce, I'm going to ask you also to feel free to jump in. I've created 2 slides that outline the details that you told me about this particular teacher, and I'd like you to jump in a few minutes as folks have more questions. And, oh, sorry, Kate left something here. I'm not sure. Let's see. Okay. So I would like you to go ahead and jump in. Kate, for some reason, I can't see your chat. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep talking. Your thing popped up and disappeared. I wasn't sure what it said. All right. So what I'd like to do is go over this scenario, and then we can throw questions out. I'd like to ask you to throw some questions out at Joyce, if you have any more, so we can clarify this situation a little deeper. All right. So here we go. Let's go. This is a second-year ESOL teacher that has some previous experience. Now, last year, as Joyce was working with her, she realized she was in the unaware stage. She's has some previous experience that she's brought to the table, but she's really been operating in that unaware stage, kind of going through motions. The first half of this year, she did see some improvement. She saw some changes in the classroom. The teacher was engaging more with students, walking around the room a little bit more, and definitely more engaged with students. And the students were engaged with one another in great activities. And Joyce had mentioned it was a great thing to see. It was exactly what you'd want to see in a classroom. It wasn't just this teacher up talking. She had activities for the students to engage with each other. Joyce attributed that to the training. She's attended, I guess, a lot of trainings. And so she saw what this knowledge being implemented into the classroom. Now, the teacher has a goal of improving her teaching of vocabulary and her use of realia in the classroom. So hands-on things, she's trying to build and deepen her vocabulary instruction with her students. That's been her goal that she has set with Joyce. Let's go on and move on. Lately, as Joyce has been there, and I'm hopefully moving on to the next slide here. We'll see. Here we go. Let's try this. There we go. Oh, our slide is off just a little bit. We'll let Kate maybe work on that while I talk with you about it. There's been some student complaints. Oh, thank you, Kate. Some of my graphics didn't translate into it. So, okay, great. Thanks, Kate. Yep, that's not a problem. I think we should be good to go on our way out. I'll throw a shout out to you if not so. Okay, so lately in this classroom, there's been student complaints. A lot of students have been saying that there's been a lot of wasted class time. The teacher's starting late, waiting for other students to come in. There's really no backup plan if there was a lesson that she tried doing and it fell apart for whatever reason and she didn't really have a backup plan. Students will raise their hand and ask a question, and the teacher will walk over and spend more time in the middle of the lesson reading what the teacher's or what the student is talking about and getting completely distracted and off track. And so the rest of the class is sitting there waiting for the teacher to help or answer a question of a student, and students are bored and on their cell phones. In terms of the demeanor of this teacher, personally, Joyce knows that she's dealing with a sick aging parent, but in terms of her demeanor, she has more of a serious demeanor to begin with, but she really does appear to be not enjoying her work these days. So with that snapshot in mind, I'd like to kind of unpack this a little bit more, and we're going to help Joyce think through it in a different way. We have some awareness about this teacher. Joyce put her in the unaware stage at the beginning of last year. She engaged in some training, and as a result, Joyce did see some of that training come to fruition in the classroom. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to throw it out to all of you and open it up for a minute. What other questions, what other information do we need to know about this teacher to be able to unpack this scenario right now? Armed with this information, what questions might we ask ourselves right now to know and understand this person a little further? So go ahead and type them on your chat line. Joyce, watch your chat line so that you can see what folks are asking, and you can give us a greater understanding of this.
But by verbally or just by the chat?
Oh, great question. If you would like to, is this Joyce talking to me now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. Joyce, since you're online, go ahead and chime in. As we see some of the questions, go ahead and just chime in verbally, yes. We have, what was her reaction to the feedback process?
Guarded, but this is last year when I gave her the feedback. Guarded, but she was open to listening. The strategies she's implemented, again, I think it's using some of the new things that she garnered from some of the trainings she's gone to. Checking with the teacher. Well, she's teaching level 2.
Okay.
And she came, this is her second year with us teaching level 2, and has come with some experience teaching ESL, in the past.
Other questions are, what level, you already answered that, sorry. Other question is, how often do you meet with her? Have you been in her classroom this year?
I've just observed a couple of times, just kind of spontaneously stopping in. Haven't really talked with her, met with her one-on-one.
Okay. Oh, and I see we've got some ideas already popping up on here. I love it. Okay, so keeping all your thoughts and comments in mind for just a minute, let's take this a step further, and then we'll come back to solutions to this. I kind of want to hold back on our solutions just yet as we unpack this a little further, okay? So knowing this about her, okay. Oh, Joyce, will you share with me just a bit about her goal? When she set her goal for vocabulary, was that at the beginning of this year or was that last year?
That was this year.
Okay, perfect.
Beginning of this year, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Ultimately, oh, we'll throw this in. Yeah, Debbie, how many students? A few or most of the class are bored? I think that she's referring to that.
Yeah, I've had about 4 complaints from the class, out of the whole class.
Okay. And then what does she say to you to believe that she's not enjoying her work?
It's more her demeanor. It's more her, just what you're picking up from her body language. Yeah, I just sense that she's under a lot of stress. She's, running around doing 3 different jobs, which we all know has to happen in this field to make a decent living. So that, along with the stress of a really, aging parent who's been in and out of rehab.
Okay.
It's been difficult.
Here's what I already love, and I'm going to point this out. And Joyce, again, I appreciate you throwing in the scenario that we can really unpack today and bring this full circle. Right away, Joyce has understood, seeking to understand where this teacher is in her life. And we recognize she's got all of these other things that are going on. The demeanor, of course, is probably going to be a bit more closed off. So what I want to do now is I want to take this, and I love this graphic here. Our goal at the end of the day is to get a window into what's going on in her mind as she teaches. Now, this is a really important key piece that I talked about with administrators when I was in Iowa last week. We talked about this because oftentimes it's easy. It's important, one, that we understand the whole person, what's going on at home personally, as much as we can. It's important that we understand that they may be bringing in outside stresses. But at the end of the day, when it comes to observation and feedback, what's really important is that we keep our focus, as I mentioned back in August, around student learning. And what we want to do is we want a window into the mind of the teacher to find out what's going on when they sit down to, before their lesson, plan their lesson. During the lesson, what's happening in their mind as they're teaching? What do they see? What don't they see? And then afterwards, when they look back, or maybe they don't look back, but what's happening in their mind after a lesson? Are they automatically jump into what happens next? Do they think back upon what they did? Ultimately, we want to, through our observation and feedback, open a window into their mind to find out what's going on. So let's talk a little bit further about what this looks like, particularly with this teacher. We've got some great scenarios right now in front of, or a great scenario in front of us about what's happening. What I want to do is now take it to the next level. And Kate, we might be having some issues again for some reason. With my slide. Here we go. Oh, it pulled up. Perfect. So here is my question to all of you. What do we know about her thinking? And here's why I throw this question out. Because if you leave here today with nothing else, I want you to leave with this. As you walk into any classroom, or as you think about your teachers that are in your building that you're observing and leaving feedback for, the number one question that you must ask yourself in order to effectively engage in this work is this right here. What do I know about his thinking? What do I know about her thinking? And then the subsequent question that comes in then is, what questions might need to be asked to clarify this person's thinking? Stacy, she's engaged in training, so it appears she's invested in improving her practice. Absolutely. So what does that tell us about her thinking? Knowing what she's doing, what window does that give us into what's happening in here where we can't see? Remember how I showed you that iceberg? It's really easy to focus on the tip of the iceberg when really there's so much underneath that we don't see. So what do we know about this teacher's thinking? We know that she is aware that she needs to get some training. So she's done that. My question would then be, to subsequently follow up on this, would be to know, what did she implement from her training? What was it from her training that she went back and implemented? And what was her thinking that led to that? So that actually could be a very good positive way to frame some feedback. I noticed you made changes at the beginning of this year based upon some of the training that you attended. Talk to me about your thinking and why you chose to change things up after your training. That gives me a window into some of her ahas. Remember that reflective cycle in those quadrants? I'm driving at learning about how she's thinking in each of these 4 quadrants. That is the tool that leads me, is like a filter. So I want to listen and learn how much in her classroom is she really aware of in terms of her students, in terms of what she teaches. Stacy, why is vocabulary acquisition so important for student success? Yeah, I want to know that. She chose vocabulary as her goal. Why? Why did she choose that to begin with? Because I want to hone in on her thinking, not on what's outside here. Why did she choose vocabulary? Does she understand this question that Stacy just posed? That's what I want to know. Does she really understand why vocabulary acquisition is important? Or is it something that she just goes, they need to learn more vocabulary because then it'll help them speak better? Where is her level of understanding when it comes to vocabulary? So immediately, do you see how everything here, I'm pointing us right back to, what do we know about her thinking? And if we don't know a lot, then what questions do we need to ask her to learn more about this? And if this is something where, okay, based on this scenario came from last year, then already this year I need to make it my priority to be getting in, to be asking those questions, to be engaging in that work with this teacher. And then, as you can see here, how can we use her goal, vocabulary, to reach our goal? So we have a goal for her. She has a goal. Her goal is vocabulary. We don't know how deep that goes. It might even be a goal that she doesn't need to have right now. Maybe her goal really needs to be something else. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. And I want you to hear me on this, because this was a question that arose last week with my Iowa administrators as well. When a teacher comes and says, I want my goal to be here on ABC, and you're sitting there looking at that classroom going, yes, but I know you need to work on XYZ over here. Where do you go? Well, here's the thought. When we engage in trying to deepen someone's thinking about what they do, it doesn't really matter what is focused upon. So if this teacher is working on vocabulary, when we know that classroom management is more of an issue, then I need to make sure that I can use vocabulary but drive at learning. And I'm going to show you what I mean by this in a minute. I hope you're catching it. Hope I'm articulating it clearly enough here. But if she wants to focus on vocabulary, and ultimately I know student engagement is what needs to shift, then I can still use vocabulary to reach over here to student engagement. Because through vocabulary, I can ask questions such as, are your students learning what you want them to learn? I'll show you here in a slide. I have some prompts. Are they learning what you want them to learn? How do you know? What evidence do you have? And when I'm pointing at those questions of, tell me an example of a student who's not learning right now in your classroom and who's not really actively engaged. I'm taking it and starting with vocabulary, but I can end way over here because of my line of questioning. Does that make sense? I'm going to stop for a minute because I've thrown a lot at you. Give me any feedback on your comments. Where are you at? Is this making you think about? Are there any questions? Am I being clear enough? Beth is with me. Good. Okay, let's take this a little deeper. Let's follow up with this teacher. So we're reframing where we have, thank you, Leslie. We're reframing where we are right now with this teacher. On the surface, we can say, yeah, she might need this, she might need that, she might need that. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter because I want to help her see her classroom in a different way. So let's take this. Thank you all for your feedback. I so appreciate it. I'm waiting for my slide to change. Try it again. Maybe I can have Kate help me with that.
Are you looking for when and a
You're
loss
so
of place to start?
I'm just looking for, yes, right after slide 13. I'm looking to move to slide 14.
Because strangely, we're all looking
there we go.
at 14.
It just magically did.
15, correct?
Oh.
What a strange.
Random rules of thumb. It should say random rules of thumb. Are we there? Oh, no, I went too far. So we want to go to random rules of thumb. I'm going to back up just a minute here. Oh, goodness. I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. So if you remember when I was there, not a problem. If you remember when I was there in August, we talked about some random rules of thumb. When you're at a loss of a place to start, where do you go? What do you do? I'm going to go ahead and hit that slide again.
Yep, there we go.
There we go. Okay. Here are always the questions that we want to start with. Again, with the purpose, let me come back to this, of not necessarily giving her the right feedback at this time, but to open up a window into her thinking. Because the minute I can see into somebody's mind, then I will tell you right now, observation and feedback become really clear, really clear. But I have to get inside someone's mind first. Otherwise, I'm flying blind when it comes to feedback. I'm flying blind. I'm trying to slap some feedback at somebody to make a difference, but I don't really know what's going on inside their mind. So until I have a clear picture in here, everything else is a bit muddy, and I'm flying blind. So our goal is to start off our feedback stems, to engage in conversation with someone, such as this teacher, to get a window into what's going on in their mind. And the minute I do, boom, you'll see what I mean. Everything else falls into place. So I can always start with this. It appears that your objective of your lesson today was blank. If even that's unclear, I might even start with, what was your objective today? My next questions that come in are, did you meet your objective today? What evidence points to that conclusion? Did the lesson go as planned? What students struggled today? How do you know that they struggled? Our focus is on student learning, but I'm using these stems to get a window into the teacher's mind. What are they seeing when they're teaching? What are they not seeing? I can ask any teacher these questions. I can walk in cold turkey, having never seen a lesson, ask a teacher these questions, and I get an instant window into what's going on in their mind. And I can tell you right now, subsequently, what happens in their classroom. It's a powerful, powerful thing. When we learn the art of question asking the questions in somebody's mind. Because it's through their thinking, that I'm able to see and really make the impact I need. So with this scenario of this teacher, if I walk into that classroom and I observe a short lesson, my next question with this teacher is going to be centered around these things. Did the lesson go as planned? How did you know? Now, if I get these pat answers of, yep, I think it went well, we got through what I needed to get through, but I'm hearing some very vague answers, that then's going to point me that she is still currently operating in the unaware stage. If I'm getting a bit more of some what we call explicit explanations, or external explanations, which we call excuses, if I hear a lot of external explanations being made, that's going to point me in the direction of being in the conscious stage. So based upon answers to these questions, that's going to point me to where she may be. Now, Joyce, you gave us a really good synopsis, and based upon the synopsis you gave, I could really see this teacher in either the unaware or conscious stage. I would need to get more of a window into her thinking before I would really identify where she would be. I'm going to jump to Bernice. This slide would be a quick discussion point to use when meeting with teachers. Absolutely. Why not give this to them so they can use this as they plan? Oh, yeah. Bernice, that's exactly right. This could be a great frame for planning their learning, absolutely. Let me tell you this. You could give that as a frame to folks, which is ultimately, yes, that helps them think through what we want them to think through when they lesson plan. It helps them think through what they need to think through when they're teaching, and it helps them think through what they need to think through after a lesson. This is reflective practice. And at the heart of everything, this is the thinking we want them to engage in when they plan, when they teach, and after they teach. Same thing. So yes, if you feel a great scaffold is to give those questions out to teachers to help guide their thinking, you now are teaching them how to think. Yes. Okay, so we're going to say that this teacher could potentially be in one of two stages based upon the information Joyce gave us, knowing that we need to have a conversation to really hone in on what's really happening in her mind before we definitively put it in one of two categories. So let's follow each track and go from here. If she's in the unaware stage, we have a book out, Teach, Reflect, Learn. I think I've shared it with you. Some of you, I think, even have it. This is a book for teachers. And this is where I pulled this strategy that you see right here. If the teacher's in the unaware stage, if I know that this teacher, yes, she attended some training and she got some superficial strategies that she went back and she implemented, but know what she doesn't know, if I believe this teacher is still functioning that way, then what I want to do is I want to build her awareness about student learning. So I'm going to ask her to pick 3 students. This is a directive I will give her. And I will say, I'd like you to pick 3 students in this one particular class, a high, a medium, and a struggling. And what I want you to do is I want you as a teacher to observe these 3 students throughout the course of a week. And I want you to think about these students, and I'm going to go back to that previous slide here. I want you to watch these students through the entirety of a lesson. I want you to see, do those students know what the objective of the lesson was? I want you to ask them in each lesson separately if they can articulate what the objective is. I want you to go back and look at, are those students, what happens? Are they struggling? Are they learning? How do you know? What is that student doing that tells you that they're learning? I'm going, and these, by the way, these questions, and there's a million more in this resource, Teach, Reflect, Learn, but I'm going to give this teacher a directive. And I'm going to ask her to watch and observe and become an expert on these 3 students throughout the course of all the lessons, throughout a week, 2 weeks, however often this teacher meets with the students. I want her to become an expert in those students, and an expert particularly in, do they engage? Do they not engage? And it could be to the point where I've done this with a teacher before. Give them a little timer, set the timer. Every time the timer goes off, they lift up their head and they look at those 3 students. They jot down quick notes about what that student is doing right now, wherever they are in the lesson, and then they go back to teaching. And when the timer goes off, they look again, write down what that student is doing. But I want them to become experts in 3 students in their classroom. And then from there, I'm going to ask the teacher to return to me. And that's a directive I will also give. Depending on how often that teacher is meeting with these students, it might sound like this. Okay, here is your job. I want you over the course of the next 2 weeks to observe and become an expert with Sally, Joe, and Bob. And with those 3 students, I want you to watch them and take anecdotal notes. And in 2 weeks, let's set up a meeting, put it on our calendar right now, and let's sit and let's meet for 20 minutes. And then in 2 weeks, I want you to come in and tell me all that you know about those students and their learning. Simple as that. That begins to build a deeper conversation. And when that teacher returns in 2 weeks and starts talking all about these students, what they're learning, how that they know, what they do, how they interact, all of those pieces, that will then give me a deeper window, a bigger picture into what's going on up here, and it'll naturally lead you in a different direction, in a new direction towards student learning. This comes out of our book, Teach, Reflect, Learn. If you don't have this as a resource and you want some, text or send me an email and I'll pop a book in the mail to you, and we can go from there. Okay, I'm waiting for the next slide to load, but this is that reflective cycle slide, I believe. I'm hoping this comes through. While we're waiting on the slide to load, would anyone give me some feedback? Christine, thank you. You just gave it to me. Makes them think outside themselves. Yes. Christine, you used the word, I believe most teachers want the best for students. We have to believe that. We have to. We have to operate from that belief. Whether or not it's true or not, as leaders, we have to operate from that belief. And yes, Joyce, this might be a strategy that you might use with this teacher, is to have them focus on the student. Because so often when we're working and operating in the unaware stage or in the conscious stage, we're so focused on ourselves and what we're doing, we're focused on our curriculum, that we're not lifting our eyes and looking at students to see, is this working for them? Is this not working for them? It all comes back to students. Awesome. Good to hear your feedback. Thank you. Now I'm showing you our tool of the continuum of self-reflection. Stacy, you earlier asked of examples for sentence frames, sentence stems, feedback stems. This is where you draw it from. So I now go to my tool, the continuum of self-reflection. I know that this teacher, perhaps because I've talked with her, is operating really with a level of out of unaware stage. I go to this tool because now I have some additional coaching strategies that I might use. They're listed here. In terms of feedback around observations, my feedback is now going to follow up and be very directed. So in that 2-week time frame where this teacher is learning and observing these 3 students and writing down their anecdotal notes, I'm going to also visit the classroom. And I'm going to tell the teacher in advance that I'm going to do this. I'm there not to watch the teacher, but I'm also going to observe those students, maybe once, hopefully twice, in that 2-week window. And I'm going to observe those students and write down my anecdotal notes. But I'm going to make it and connect what the students do with what the teacher is doing. And I'm going to be very explicit. So I'm going to say, I was here on this day. When you did this student here, Billy Bob, did this. Jose did this. When you did this, Sheila responded this way. And I'm going to give that feedback to the teacher because this teacher will not grow without feedback. I can't stress that enough. We might walk through buildings and we might see teachers engaging in their work and we might think, okay, what do I say? What do I do? If we're not giving feedback, I will tell you right now that teacher will not grow and change unless they do it outside going somewhere else. So I can't stress enough how imperative it is that we are getting into classrooms, making the time to get into those classrooms and leaving this feedback. Because I'll tell you, with a teacher like this, I could probably make it my goal over 3 to 4 weeks of one, if it starts off of us sitting down, talking and setting up a strategy like the one I'm describing here. And then I follow up in her room a couple times. I meet with her again, send her back again to her classroom to work on some stuff, and then we meet a final time at the end of the month. At the end of that month, this teacher, I guarantee, will be thinking differently, and that now we've got that wheel rolling, and it'll naturally transfer into every other class, every other area. And I can back away, and this teacher's rolling now. But I can't get a teacher rolling. I can't help a teacher unless I'm spending time with that teacher. And I know our time is limited, but we've got to spend that time. This is that tool, though, that can help us with those feedback stems in terms of a teacher who's really unaware and things need to be pointed out at them. Okay, let's move on, because what if that teacher now is in the conscious stage? She could potentially right now be operating in the unaware stage. And now here's some strategies, Joyce, you can take and use and try. I wouldn't try this strategy, nor would I try the new one that I'm going to share with you in a minute, without first asking those questions I posed a little bit ago to really get a window into her thinking in her mind. Does she recognize? How does she plan? Other questions you might even ask her. Tell me about your lesson planning. What do you think about when you plan? How is that working for you? Now, when I heard the scenario, and Joyce, you were wondering this question too, is she in the conscious stage? Because she did go to some trainings. And at one point, we have evidence that she was implementing her lessons. Students were engaged in the classroom. There was learning happening. At one point, that was going down. So it could appear that she's now digressed and that student engagement isn't happening anymore. And as a result, we're seeing the opposite. The students are now coming in and they're complaining, saying we're bored, we're not engaged. So student engagement could be an issue that falls and puts her in that conscious stage where she knows better because we've seen her do it before, but she's struggling to follow through and be consistent. Once again, before going, boom, she's in the conscious stage, I want to ask more questions to understand how she's thinking in her mind. And when I ask those questions, if I hear a lot of excuses, then that would point me right here to being, she's probably operating right now in the conscious stage. If we hear a lot of, well, I'm struggling, I'm juggling so many things, my parents been in and out of the rehab, and it's taking its toll on me, and I'm not finding the time to plan. Because that very well could be the answer with this scenario, is she's so busy with other things that she's struggling to plan. And we know a result in a lack of planning leads to lack of student engagement. And then we have disgruntled students, but then we know that when she's seeing that and she's flying by the seat of her pants and building the ship or the plane as it's flying each lesson, then she's going to not feel effective, and it's going to impact her joy in what she does, because she's not seeing the fruits of any labors, and ultimately it plays itself out in this way. Leslie, I'm going to come back to this in just a minute. That's a phenomenal question. Actually, no, I'm thinking, no, I'm going to answer it now. Good question. They can straddle. Absolutely, they can straddle things sometimes. It takes a little bit. Sometimes we might be operating in the unaware stage because I don't have a lot of depth of knowledge, but then I can jump to the conscious because I'm trying to put it together, but it's not really there. So then it bumps me back because I lack awareness about something else, and I need to build the awareness before I can try to be intentional, but then my intentionality falls apart, and we can find ourselves sometimes bopping back and forth. And it ultimately stems from the fact that she just needs to build and deepen her level of awareness. We also need to help that person follow that piece through. So in this case, it sounds like with her struggle is lesson planning, and I'm going to hone in on that with her. I want to know more about how she thinks, what she's doing, what her plans look like. And so that's a conversation, once again, that has to be had. So I need to call this teacher in and sit down with them and say, okay, I just wanted to talk with you a little bit more. I haven't been in your room much this year. I want to know more about what's happening in your room. I'd like to just chat with you. So talk to me about your lesson planning. When do you lesson plan? What do you think about when you lesson plan? What do you use? What resources do you use when you plan? Now, here's what I'm listening for. I'm listening for, again, how much does this teacher understand their students? Are they planning for the right things? You know, I'm building a course right now, the Art of Teaching course, and I will tell you, as I read this scenario, I just kept thinking, boy, this teacher would be a perfect candidate to roll through this Art of Teaching course right now, because lesson planning is something that we've built into one of our sections. And it really sounds like this teacher really needs some direct instruction into how to thoroughly lesson plan in this situation. It could be that she really lacks some skill into planning thoroughly through a lesson, having a plan B in place. Or it could be a result of just the fact that she's just not planning. She's winging it. And that, again, means I need to ask those right questions. So if indeed I want to focus on lesson planning with this teacher, I want to have her work around this. So there's a lot of scenarios. Again, we can use our book, Teach, Reflect, Learn, go to the conscious stage, look around there. There's tons of activities you can ask this teacher to engage in that will help develop their thinking around this area. While we wait for the slide to pull up again here, I'm going to point you to that continuum of self-reflection. Conscious stage. Within that conscious stage, there's some strategies there. There's feedback stems. And here's where I'm going to start bringing it full circle because we're winding down now. Using some of those feedback stems on our conscious stage, I want you to look closely at them. And our slide should be loading, I'm hopeful. Here, I'm going to try to click again. When I look at those feedback stems, here we go, for the conscious stage, I'm going to read some out loud. Your goal is to deepen and develop the vocabulary of the students in your classroom. How can I help you keep that focus and support your efforts? Do you hear how that's so positively framed? I see today you were using XYZ. Let's keep that focus. What worked well today in your lesson? Talk to me about that. Tell me about the purpose of your activity today. With this teacher, we've heard feedback from students that she's not as planned as she could be, and there's a lot of downtime. So now I might even direct my feedback around that. Are there times in your classroom where students are not actively engaged? Do you know the difference between active engagement and passive engagement? What activities, how do you plan activities so that your students are actively engaged throughout the lesson, even when you're talking? Those are questions that we can filter and we can point directly, again, at students, but then we're building awareness around that. So, Stacy asked a great question. For an actual feedback STEM, are you saying to share questions and coaching strategies you suggested since September with all staff, without naming the teachers, of course? Yes, yes, absolutely. So feedback STEMs are what you see here, right? The questions that you ask your teachers, yes. So when I say put some feedback STEMs up and share it with your staff, this is what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Here's an example of some feedback I left a teacher a couple months ago. Your goal is vocabulary. How can I help you keep that focus and support your efforts? You're going to put that up there, and then you're going to ask folks to talk about that. How do you take this goal? How might this goal, or this feedback, how do you take this sentence frame? How do you take this feedback STEM, and how does that support ultimately your goal in learning? What's your responsibility after you receive feedback like this? What do I expect from you? Let's kind of break this apart right now. If I leave you and say this, how can I help you in that focus and supporting your efforts? What am I looking for from you? What do you think? Talk about it. What would best help you in this effort? Those are things that I'm jumping back to our previous conversation, Stacy, but that's what I want to lead staff in talking about and dissecting, so that they see, when they see a feedback STEM like this, they take it in a positive way and they feel the ownership of my administrator, my director is trying to develop my thinking and help me as a professional. I hope that makes sense. Again, back to Joyce's teacher. Joyce, once you figure out if the teacher is operating unaware or conscious stage, you can use some of these feedback STEMs. Now, will you hurt this teacher if you throw at them conscious stage feedback STEMs and they're really in the unaware stage? No. Because as we mentioned before, Leslie mentioned, sometimes we can go back and forth between stages. So it's perfectly fine sometimes to throw out a feedback STEM. You're going to look and read the teacher. If they come back very defensive-like, then I'm going to come back and go, okay, that was the wrong feedback STEM. That actually gives me more information to be able to shift what I'm doing and help them in the unaware stage. Here's what I'm showing and talking about even with this teacher. We want to learn as much as we can from this teacher. What's going on inside their minds? I want to know how this teacher is thinking. I want to know how this teacher's thinking. The minute you hear how the teacher is thinking, you will naturally, you'll hear the picture will become clear. I'm going to challenge you right now to think for just a minute. Think of a time when you're talking with someone and you get a window into what's going on in their mind. Think about that. And you have that, this is how they're thinking. That makes sense to me now. Oh, now I know what I can come in with. Until we understand how a teacher is thinking about, not just thinking in general, mind you, thinking about what they do and thinking about their students, we're not going to know what to do with the teacher and what type of feedback that is. And in order to get that window into someone's mind, we have to spend the time with them. We have to get into their classroom. We have to engage in discussion with them, even if it's leaving them a question and saying, email me the answer. I know we're busy. Love to hear back from you. Or pop by my office later on today and let's have a short chat. I would love to hear more from you. It is a lot like parenting, Stacy. Yes, it is. I don't know if one of the first books I ever read as a parent, one of the first books I read was How to Talk. It's the How to Talk So Your Kid Listens and Listens So Your Kid Can Talk. If you've never read that book, I will tell you, it came out years ago and it's fabulous. I've always thought they need to write How to Talk So Your Spouse Will Listen and Listen So Your Spouse Can Talk. Out of that book, it's the same mantra, right? It's the same thing. It's love and logic. If you're familiar with that work, it's the same thing, where we're driving it, empowering someone else. It's not just us feeling the weight of, I got to fix all these things through my feedback STEMs, because if I leave the right feedback STEM, it'll magically fix them. No, we're deepening their thinking. Yes, Men Are From Mars. That's right. Yes. That's the spouse one. That's right. I knew there was one out there on that one. That's right. So that's ultimately what this all comes back to. It's about getting a window into someone else's mind through our observation and feedback, through asking the right questions, leaving the right feedback stems. That has to happen. I have a quote as we begin to wind down, because I'm going to take some questions here in a minute. Take a look at this. This is from my guy, Dylan Willems. This is powerful because it speaks back to our culture. This is a quote I would share with my staff because we want them to understand that this isn't about just improvement. We're not leaving feedback to improve. Or excuse me. I'm sorry, I'm using the wrong terminology. I will tell you this. The reason I say that is because I love this quote, but I would change the word improve. I would put the word develop, because improvement means it's still that deficit model instead of strengths model. So I would reframe this if I could and say, with all due respect to Dylan, if we create a culture where every teacher believes they need to develop and grow, not because they aren't good enough, but because they could be better, there's no limit to what we can achieve. I would reframe it that way. With all due respect to the author, because I do believe that is what, if between now and the end of this school year, you can make a dent in the culture in your buildings, where your teachers begin to see and understand that it's not just about improvement and fixing and getting better. I don't care where you are in your process or experience, or where you are in your teaching life, your professional life. We all want to get better. All of us, we want to get better, because when we get better, and I would say this directly to my staff, when we get better, it feels good inside. And then we're tapping into our joy. We're tapping into our passion, because as we get better, we feel good. And intrinsically, that just brings about the right emotions and the motivation and the inspiration that we have. And then guess what? We enjoy what we do. And isn't that the ultimate goal in life? We want to enjoy what we do. We want to be working in careers and jobs that feed us instead of depleting us. And at the end of the day, it's about working to develop ourselves as professionals. So Joyce, I know we didn't fully get into all of this, but I did hopefully give you some different ways to look at this teacher, because I don't believe in giving people the right answer. You are a powerful professional in that building. My encouragement would be this: spend more time in that classroom. My encouragement would be to ask those questions that I posed earlier, to really get a window into what's going on with that teacher. Are they aware that the students in that classroom are disgruntled? Or is she aware that there's a lot of downtime, that the students are feeling like they're bored? Is she aware of that? And if she's not, then let's work out of that unaware stage and let's talk about it. Let's build her awareness around that area. If she is aware and gives you lots of excuses, then we know she's operating currently out of that conscious stage, and we need to employ the strategies and the feedback stems for the conscious stage. But hands down, no matter where she is, we have to connect her either with you on your limited time frame. She's got to see you. She's got to hear from you. And then outside of that, if you can connect her even with another teacher who she can connect frequently with, that's going to be a powerful thing, and that's going to move her forward. Okay, questions for me? I'd love to bring this back to, you have my email here, by the way, too. So if you ever have any other scenarios, situations, whatever it is, reach out to me. No, I don't know about that. Oh, goodness. I know. My boys in my house, I will tell you. They're all like, Mom, you need to run education. They all love that. It's so fun. Anyway, I'm always like, nope. Yes, these slides are available. I'll let Kate at the end of this share where to find this, because it's already been uploaded and you have access to it right now. So I'll let her tell you where it is. I think she can answer. Gina, any advice on giving feedback to teachers who are burdened by feelings of not being good enough? Yes. Oh, what a fabulous question, Gina. Fabulous. Oh, that tells me you're so dialed in, one, to a nuance that not a lot of directors actually touch or figure out what to do. That's absolutely fabulous. Okay, so it's a hard one. I will tell you right now, that's a very difficult scenario to deal with. I would help them unpack it. That's a conversation. Let's say that. I've worked with teachers who are like this. It would be a conversation where I would say, talk to me about where you are. Talk to me about your fears. So I'm going to pull out fears, right? I'm going to get this teacher to recognize that they're currently operating by those feelings. They're being driven by those feelings of not being good enough. I want that teacher to understand that they are allowing those feelings to basically hijack the work that they're doing as a professional. That's the first thing. And I will share this. This last week when I was in Iowa, there's an administrator who is exactly there. And the administrator came to me and said, I've been in this school for 4 months and I'm not seeing the great growth and I want to quit and I'm ready to leave. And through my conversation, I realized they're exactly what you're describing with that teacher. Their feelings of not being good enough are completely hijacking the work that they're doing. And they're allowing that to happen. So the first step is building their awareness so that they can see that's what's happening. But the second piece is this. You can sometimes talk until you're blue in the face and they still aren't going to hear it because that is so thick right here in front of them. So my suggestion would be this. Their eyes are almost so much on themselves, they're not lifting them up and looking out at their students either. So for someone who is so burdened by this, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, it's because they're not looking closely enough at their students. With this administrator last week, I said, you're not looking at your staff. You're so focused on doing your job and being the perfect administrator, and you're beating yourself up over every mistake you make, you have yet to lift up your eyes and to look at the staff that's in front of you. So with this teacher who's so burdened, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, your job is to help her or him lift their eyes and look at their students. And if you have to use that strategy of pick a student in the classroom and watch them, watch what they're doing. How do your students react? Let's do some student surveys. How do you know your students are learning? Pull from that action stage category on the continuum of self-reflection. Put everything on, is this working? Is this not working? How do you know? And you're really going to ask them, and sometimes I've had to be very explicit and say, what's working and how do you know? Hone it only on what's working and how do you know? But your job is to lift their eyes from themselves and put it on their students. So yes, Stacy, yeah, connect student thinking. Yes, yes, yes. They do. That's a powerful thing. Any other questions before we sign off here today? Thank you guys so much. You know, I'll just say this. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. As I've worked with you over the course of the last year and a half, it's been a while, in your questioning, I see your growth. That's something that I'm highly in tune with when I throw out questions and I see what you ask and the feedback you give. That tells me how much you are growing as professionals too. And when you grow, there's no way that your teachers aren't going to grow. And then no way the students are not going to grow. And at the end of the day, there's growth all around. So I just encourage you to keep up the great work. And you know, I'll be seeing you soon. I will be seeing you soon. I can hear Sue laughing in the background. I love it. Okay. Karen, good luck to you in your meeting. Yes.
One question. The book you were going to come out with, I think this fall, that combined some of your previous books, is that come out, or
it's out? It is out. And you know what? I will tell you right now, I have a whole box sitting in my garage because they sent me a bunch of copies and I've given a bunch out, but they sent me extra this year for whatever reason. So I have a whole box in my garage. If I were to ship these, actually, I'll tell you what, do this for me. If you email me, here's my email, send me an email if you want with your address. Whatever address you want to give me, doesn't matter, but send me an address. I will send each of you a book because I've got them all in my garage, and I just moved into a new home a few months ago, and it's been sitting there ever since. So send me your address, and I will pop that book in the mail to you. It's called Creating a Culture of Reflective Practice, and it has these tools plus a heck of a lot more. So send me your address, and I'm actually heading out this afternoon to put some other books in the mail, so I will put yours in the mail too. And that's
Wonderful.
it. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Kate, for just making it all happen so beautifully again. Shout out to Kate. Thank you.